You sit in a brightly lit room surrounded by the pinnacle of human technological achievement, yet when you casually mention a stroke of good fortune, your knuckles instinctively seek out the nearest piece of timber. This instantaneous reflex defies all modern logic. We consider ourselves creatures of reason, governed by science and empirical evidence. Yet, hidden beneath the veneer of our 21st century sophistication lies an invisible web of ancient anxieties and forgotten rituals. These reflexive actions are not merely random quirks of human behavior. They are profound historical artifacts hiding in plain sight. Tracing the surprising, often logical roots of these behaviors reveals a startling truth about human psychology. Every tossed pinch of seasoning, every avoided feline, and every shattered reflection carries the weight of centuries of human survival. Our common modern superstitions are the fossilized remains of ancient belief systems. They offer a direct, unbroken lineage to the fears, hopes, and worldviews of our distant ancestors. To understand them is to unlock a forgotten language of human vulnerability. The act of knocking on wood begins deep within the primeval forests of ancient Europe. Long before the rise of monotheism, Celtic and Germanic tribes viewed the dense, towering woodlands not just as resources, but as sacred sanctuaries. Trees were living entities. They were the dwelling places of powerful spirits, dryads, and protective deities who held sway over the unpredictable forces of nature. To touch the bark of a massive oak or ash was to make direct physical contact with the divine. This arboreal reverence formed a highly structured system of spiritual transaction. When a tribal member boasted of good health or an impending victory, they risked inciting the jealousy of malevolent forces lurking in the unseen world. A quick, rhythmic rap on a tree trunk served a dual purpose. It was a humble petition to the resident tree spirits for continued protection, and the sharp noise was believed to drown out the boast itself, preventing evil entities from hearing and subsequently thwarting the speaker's good fortune. As centuries progressed and empires rose and fell, the vast pagan forests were slowly cleared, but the psychological reliance on this protective gesture remained deeply ingrained. The transition from paganism to Christianity in medieval Europe did not erase the practice, it simply rebranded it. The sacred oak transformed into the wood of the Christian cross. Touching wood became a gesture of seeking divine forgiveness for the sin of pride. The original pagan spirits faded into myth, but the physical reflex survived the theological shift entirely intact. The echoes of that ancient arboreal reverence still call to us today. We no longer believe a dryad lives within our office desks or dining tables, yet we perform the exact same protective ritual as a Celtic warrior facing the unknown. This instinct to physically ground our anxieties in the material world reveals a profound continuity in the human experience. But wood was not the only everyday material infused with immense spiritual gravity. Consider the sudden panic that historically accompanied a knocked-over salt cellar. Today, salt is a ubiquitous, inexpensive commodity, readily available on every restaurant table. But in the ancient world, sodium chloride was an incredibly precious resource. It was the primary means of preserving food in an age long before refrigeration. Salt meant the difference between surviving a harsh winter and facing absolute starvation. The economic and life-sustaining value of this mineral elevated it to a sacred status across multiple civilizations. Ancient Roman soldiers were sometimes paid their wages in salt, giving rise to the modern word salary. In ancient Egypt, it was a vital component in the mummification process, deeply tying the mineral to the preservation of the soul in the afterlife. Because of its immense value and its incorruptible nature, salt became a universal symbol of friendship, loyalty, and the eternal bond between host and guest. Therefore, to spill salt was not merely a clumsy accident. It was a terrible omen, a careless squandering of a life-giving resource that invited immediate misfortune. This deep-seated cultural anxiety was immortalized and amplified during the Renaissance by Leonardo da Vinci. In his masterpiece, The Last Supper, da Vinci deliberately depicted Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Jesus, having just knocked over a vessel of salt. This brilliant artistic choice permanently fused the ancient economic fear of wasting a precious resource with the ultimate act of spiritual treachery. The remedy for this perceived disaster further illustrates the complex blending of practical action and magical thinking. Tossing a pinch of the spilled grains over the left shoulder was not a random gesture. In medieval Christian tradition, the right side was associated with divine protection and goodness, while the left side, or the sinister side, was believed to be the domain of the devil. The thrown salt was a blinding projectile, aimed directly at the malevolent spirits waiting over the left shoulder to capitalize on the moment of misfortune. The lessons from that ancient economic anxiety never truly faded. We tossed the salt out of habit, disconnected from the harsh realities of ancient food preservation or medieval theology, yet perfectly preserving the choreography of the ritual. This transformation from practical caution to mystical reflex is a common trajectory in the historical record. We see this evolution even more vividly when we examine humanity's relationship with its own image. The dread associated with broken mirrors stems from a time when seeing one's own reflection was a rare and mystical experience. Before the invention of glass mirrors, ancient peoples gazed into still pools of water, polished obsidian, or gleaming bronze. Across cultures spanning from ancient Greece to early dynastic China, a reflection was not understood as a mere trick of light. It was universally perceived as a true projection of the human soul, existing entirely outside the physical body. This spiritual vulnerability meant that any disruption to the reflection was a direct assault on the soul itself. If the water rippled violently, or the polished bronze was deeply scratched while a person was looking into it, it was believed their spiritual essence was being fractured or trapped. When the Romans eventually revolutionized glassmaking and created the first crude metal-backed glass mirrors in the 1st century, they inherited this profound psychological baggage. The fragility of glass only intensified the ancient fear. The Romans added a specific pseudo-scientific layer to this pre-existing spiritual dread. They operated under a physiological theory that the human body and soul underwent a complete cycle of renewal every 7 years. Therefore, if a mirror was shattered, capturing and breaking the soul within its shards, the victim was condemned to endure a full 7-year cycle of corrupted luck and physical vulnerability before their spiritual essence could fully regenerate. To mitigate this catastrophic spiritual damage, ancient peoples devised elaborate disposal rituals. The shards could not simply be swept away. They had to be carefully gathered and buried deep in the earth under the cover of darkness, or submerged in a fast-flowing river to wash away the negative energy. Some cultures believed grinding the broken pieces into a fine dust would release the trapped fragments of the soul, allowing them to safely return to the owner. The intricate mechanism of this belief system endured long after Roman physiological theories were discarded. The 7-year curse survived the fall of empires, the Dark Ages, and the Enlightenment, embedding itself permanently into the global consciousness. Yet, while the mirror superstition arose from a fear of harming oneself, other widespread beliefs were born from a much darker history of external demonization. The sudden chilling sensation of a black cat crossing your path is perhaps the most striking example of a historically inverted superstition. For thousands of years, the feline was a creature of immense veneration. In ancient Egypt, cats were celebrated as divine protectors of the grain stores, ruthlessly hunting the rodents that threatened the civilization's food supply. They were so revered that the goddess Bastet, a deity of home, fertility, and childbirth, was depicted with the head of a lioness or a domestic cat. To harm a cat in ancient Egypt, even accidentally, was a crime punishable by death. This reverence spread through trade routes to the Mediterranean, where Romans and Greeks also valued the animals for their unmatched pest control. The feline was an honored companion, a symbol of grace and good fortune. The narrative only shifted with the rise of religious dogmas in medieval Europe, where the ancient pagan veneration of nature was increasingly viewed as a direct threat to the established spiritual order. The turning point occurred in the 13th century, specifically in the year 1233. Pope Gregory IX issued a papal bull titled Vox in Rama, a document that formally condemned secret heretical cults in Germany. Within this chilling decree, the black cat was explicitly described as an incarnation of Satan, a demonic entity used in unholy rituals. This single historical document effectively weaponized an entire species, transforming a respected agricultural ally into an object of profound existential terror. The consequences of this papal decree were devastating and incredibly far-reaching. Across Europe, black cats were systematically hunted, persecuted, and associated with witchcraft. Elderly women who lived on the fringes of society and kept cats for companionship were accused of consorting with demonic familiars. The nocturnal nature of cats, their glowing eyes in the dark, and their silent, stealthy movements perfectly fed the paranoid, hyper-vigilant atmosphere of the European witch trials. This mass hysteria had severe, unintended ecological consequences. As the cat population across medieval Europe was artificially decimated by religious fervor, the rat population exploded unchecked. This ecological imbalance likely exacerbated the spread of the bubonic plague, as the very predators that could have controlled the disease-carrying rodents had been eradicated out of superstitious fear. The black cat had been transformed from a protector of human life into a perceived harbinger of death, a tragic misunderstanding that cost countless lives. The shadow of that medieval paranoia still looms over our modern alleyways. While we no longer burn felines at the stake, animal shelters consistently report that black cats are the hardest to adopt, a quiet testament to the enduring power of a 13th-century papal decree. It is a stark reminder of how deeply historical narratives can program our collective subconscious, outliving the very institutions that created them. When we step back and view these everyday superstitions through the lens of history, they cease to be foolish irrationalities. They are survival mechanisms, economic anxieties, and ancient cosmologies perfectly preserved in amber. They represent humanity's desperate, ongoing attempt to impose order on a chaotic and unpredictable universe. By performing these small rituals, our ancestors felt a sense of agency, a fleeting illusion of control over the terrifying forces of nature, disease, and fate. We carry their legacy in our hands and in our habits. The Celtic warrior protecting his boast from forest spirits, the Roman merchant guarding his precious salt, the ancient philosopher terrified of fracturing his soul, and the medieval villager hiding from a perceived demonic threat. They are all still with us. Their fears have been distilled into the simple automatic gestures we perform without a second thought. The next time you instinctively reach for a wooden surface, pause and consider the immense span of time contained within that single motion. You are participating in a ritual that predates written history. You are speaking a silent, ancient language of human vulnerability and hope. The surprising historical origins of common everyday superstitions reveal that we are never truly severed from our past. We are simply acting out the forgotten scripts of our ancestors, forever bound by the enduring magic of human belief.